So 𝒔𝒊𝒈𝒕 is seeing the emergence of living things, tiny, primitive living things from It's interesting, I mean, we think that Sri Aurobindo wrote this in the late 1930s, and at some point after that, 30 or 40 years later, the biologists also came to the conclusion that the first living creatures, they must have emerged in some kind of mud. That they could be maybe different kinds of mud that could first manifest. Mud, yes. He said it has to be something, it can't be too liquid, otherwise the formation, the body won't happen. And it can't be too solid, otherwise how can it happen? But in some kind of slimy mud, perhaps the first single-celled living creatures could emerge. Some biologists have this theory. Of course, they can't really explain how life can emerge out of matter. And they are not ready to say that the potentiality of life must have been there in the matter already. Only very, very recently, a few physicists have realized that the fact that we can have life means that the potentiality, the possibility of life must have been there already in the very first Big Bang. But it took a long time for matter as we know it to evolve, and then out of that matter for life to emerge. And I think they haven't yet taken the next step and realized that, if the potentiality of life has been there and has emerged, that the potentiality of consciousness, of mental consciousness, must also have been there from the very beginning. No? I don't think anybody has stood up and said that yet. They've only said there's something called the anthropic principle. They've said that the conditions of our universe must be such to allow consciousness to emerge. But I don't think they're yet saying, of course, it must have been conscious from the beginning. No, there must have been the potentiality of consciousness there from the beginning. So Sri Aurobindo is explaining something like that. So this is what 𝒔𝒊𝒈𝒕 is seeing. His sight, spiritual in embodying orbs, could pierce through the grey phosphorescent haze and scan the secrets of the shifting flux that animates these mute and solid cells, and leads the thought and longing of the flesh and the keen lust and hunger of its will. This, too, he tracked along its hidden stream and traced its acts to a miraculous fount, a mystic presence none can probe nor rule, creator of this game of ray and shade in this sweet and bitter paradoxical life, asks from the body the soul's intimacies, and by the swift vibration of a nerve links its mechanic throbs to light and love. It summons the spirit's sleeping memories up from subconscious depths beneath time's foam. Oblivious of their flame of happy truth, arriving with heavy eyes that hardly see, they come disguised as feelings and desires. Like weeds upon the surface, float a while and rise and sink on a somnambulist tide. Impure, degraded, though her emotions are, always a heaven truth broods in life's deeps. In her obscurest members burns that fire. A touch of God's rapture in creation's acts, a lost remembrance of felicity lurks still in the dumb roots of death and birth. The world's senseless beauty mirrors God's delight. That rapture's smile is secret everywhere. It flows in the wind's breath, in the tree's sap. Its hued magnificence blooms in leaves and flowers. When life broke through its half-drowse in the plant that feels and suffers but cannot move or cry, in beast and in winged bird and thinking man, it made of the heart's rhythm its music's beat. It forced the unconscious tissues to awake and ask for happiness, and earn the pang, and thrill with pleasure and laughter of brief delight, and quiver with pain, and crave for ecstasy. Imperative, voiceless, ill understood, too far from light, too close to being's core, born strangely in time from the eternal bliss. It presses on heart's core and vibrant nerve. Its sharp self-seeking tears our consciousness. Our pain and pleasure have that sting for cause. Instinct with it, but blind to its true joy, the soul's desire leaps out towards passing things. All nature's longing drive, none can resist, comes surging through the blood and quickened sense. An ecstasy of the infinite is her cause. It turns in us to finite loves and lusts, the will to conquer and have, to seize and keep, to enlarge life's room and scope and pleasure's range, to battle and overcome and make one's own, the hope to mix one's joy with others' joy, a yearning to possess and be possessed, to enjoy and be enjoyed, to feel, to live. Here was its early, brief attempt to be, its rapid end of momentary delight, whose stamp of failure haunts all ignorant life.
His sight, spiritual and embodied orbs, could pierce through the grey phosphorescent haze and scan the secrets of the shifting flux that animates these mute and solid cells and leads the thought and longing of the flesh and the keen lust and hunger of its will.
You can understand this, Nilish? Is there any words that you don't understand? His sight, this is King Aswapati. He's not using physical sight, he's using spiritual sight, but still he's got physical eyes. That spiritual sight is looking through these embodying orbs. An orb means a perfect sphere, and it's poetically, this word is used for our eyes, because if we really look at the structure of the eye, it's an orb, it's a complete sphere. Embodying orbs, our eyes. So his sight, because it's spiritual sight, even though it's in physical eyes, it can pierce through. He has this power of vision that can pierce through this haze, this fog, this grey, phosphorescent haze. Phosphorescence. Sometimes if we're down at the beach and at night, you can see that on the surface of the sea there's light shining. It's many, many tiny little beings, living beings, who are making their own light. Phosphorescence is living light, the light of living beings. So there's a kind of mist of that phosphorescence, and he can see through it to what is behind. What are the secrets it's hiding? There's a kind of flow, a current, a shifting flux. Flux means a flow. And this shifting flux is animating, is making alive the cells of our bodies. They're mute, they can't make sounds yet, but they are solid, but they're made alive by there's some kind of flow of energy. And that flow of energy is leading the thought and longing of the flesh. I think it's only in special circumstances that we note that our body has consciousness and it can think. It not only wants and longs for things, it has thoughts and it can make suggestions to us. Later on in the poem, Sri Aurobindo describes how when Savitri is able to silence her mind completely, she becomes aware of these thoughts that are coming up from the body and making suggestions to her mind.
Also, sometimes when there is danger, the body reacts before the mind.
But before the mind is aware, yes, yes. So it has its own consciousness. So this is this life flow that has its own consciousness. So it's this flow of energy that leads the thought and longing of the flesh and all its intense desires, its keen lust and the hunger of its will. That's the main thing we experience our body, when it's hungry and thirsty and when it's wanting something very much. No? Martin?
These two interact along a thin stream and trace its acts to miraculous form. A mystic presence none can broke nor rule, creator of this game, rain and shade, in this sweet and bitter paradoxical life, asks from the body the soul's intimacies, and by the swift vibration of the nerve, links its mechanic shocks to light and love.
Yes. So he traces that flow of energy to its source, and he sees that the source, the fount where this energy is coming from, it's a presence, a miraculous presence. We can't penetrate into that miraculous presence and we can't control it. But that mystic presence is the creator of this game, this play of light and darkness in this life of ours, which sometimes is sweet and sometimes is bitter and is always self-contradictory. It's that mystic presence. What it wants is that the body should feel the same kind of intimate, direct contact that the soul feels, which we are not usually aware of. But the very direct knowledge by identity. That presence which is in us, the spirit which is in us, wants to make the body sensitive enough to have the same kind of intimate experiences as the soul. And because of that, it works through the cells, the nerves of our body. Their behavior may seem to be just mechanical, action and reaction, responding to contacts, no? But he says those mechanic throbs which we think of as being unconscious, that presence which is there links them to light, to consciousness, and to love. And then he gives a very unusual and beautiful image for this. Sarojini, would you read it?
It's someone the streets, sleeping memories from subconscious depth beneath time's form, oblivious of their flame of happy truth, arriving with heavy eyes that hardly see. They come disguised as feeling and desire, and like weeds upon the surface float a while, and gaze and sink on a
somnambulist tide. Yes. So let's pause there. So this mystic presence, summons, it calls to the spirit's sleeping memories, deep within us, deep within matter, deep within living tissues, are the memories of the spirit's sleeping memories. And when that presence calls them up, they come up from the levels that are below our level of conscious awareness, from the subconscious depths, beneath time's foam, as if time is a kind of a stream with bubbles on the surface. Foam is like many bubbles on the surface. No? So the spirit's memories are sleeping deep down as if below water, and this presence calls them up. And they come up to the surface. But those sleeping memories of the spirit have forgotten. They are oblivious. Oblivion is forgetfulness. They are completely unaware of that flame of true consciousness which is within them, which is the spirit's consciousness. They are oblivious of their flame of happy truth. They're still asleep, or almost sleeping. Up they come from those subconscious levels, and their eyes are still heavy. They can't open them properly. You may know this feeling in the early morning. They can hardly see. And they come to us, we become aware of them disguised. They come to us disguised as feelings, sensations, emotions, desires. They're floating up from the bottom like weeds, like seaweeds or water weeds. They come up and they float for a little while on the surface of our consciousness. They rise up and then they sink again into this somnambulist tide, this flow of whatever it is. Somnambulist. A somnambulist is a person who is walking in their sleep. Ambulare, to walk, they're walking in their sleep, in their somnus. Somnambulist tide. So that's how the spirit's memories come to the surface and begin to wake up the consciousness a little bit, not much. It's still sleepy.
Impure, degraded, lower motion, always a heaven truth roots in life's deeps. In her obscurest members burn that fire. A touch of God's rapture in creation's acts, a last remembrance of felicity, looks still in the dumb roots of death and birth. The world's senseless beauty mirrors God's delight.
Thank you. So if we look at the activities of nature, the way that nature works and behaves, especially perhaps in these lower life forms, maybe her movements, her actions seem impure. And they are degraded. They are not the high, pure, blissful life that Asvapati has seen on the higher levels. This earth nature is mixed and lowered. Her emotions are. But even so, always within them, there's a heaven truth. A divine truth is there, brooding. We had this word so often, no? There's a power within us which is preparing something, like the mother hen sitting on her eggs. Something's going to hatch out. So in the very depths of life, there's a heaven truth which is brooding there. No? And in the darkest and most degraded and impure parts of life, that fire, that heaven truth, that flame of happy truth is burning. Whatever lower forms of life there are, still within them there's a touch of the divine bliss and ecstasy, God's rapture in the acts of creation. The original act of creation, Sri Aurobindo always says that it was delight that created the world. No? So there's a memory of that, a lost remembrance of felicity, of ananda, of bliss, is still hiding there at the very roots, those roots that can't express themselves clearly, the roots of birth, of death and birth. So this life that we see around us, its beauty, inexplicable, apparently meaningless beauty, it's a reflection of God's delight, the divine Ananda.
Dearest members, what is
Members are parts. You can have members of a group, or you can have members of the body. So in life, there are parts that are very obscure, that are dark and degraded and false. But he says, even in those most obscure, the darkest and most degraded aspects of life, still this truth is there. That fire, the fire of the spirit, the energy, the creative energy and delight of the spirit. Joel?
That rapture smile is secret everywhere. It flows in the wind's breath, in the trees' sap. Its hue magnificence blows, blooms in leaves and flowers. When life broke through, its heart draws in the plant that feels and suffers, but cannot move or cry. In beast and in winged bird and thinking man, it made of the heart's rhythm its music's beat. It forced the unconscious tissues to awake and ask for happiness and earn the pang and thrill with pleasure and laughter of brief delight, and quiver with pain and crave for ecstasy.
Such a beautiful passage, no? The secret smile of God's rapture. It's everywhere, in everything. Nothing could exist if it weren't there. It flows in the wind's breath. It moves in the tree's sap, that liquid which is there in the plant, which carries its life force. And it's the hue, the many-colored magnificence of God's delight that blooms, that blossoms in leaves and flowers, all the things, the sights that delight us in nature. And then he describes a time when life first breaks through. It's half drowse in the plant. At the plant stage, there's some kind of sleepy consciousness there. Actually, we're surprised to find out how much consciousness there is there in plants. But still, that consciousness is half asleep. The plant feels, it suffers, but he says it can't move from where it is. Plants somehow are fixed. No? Although somehow trees do manage to put out their roots, and if they don't like the earth they're in, they can move over time to somewhere else. And nowadays with sensitive instruments, we can hear that when plants are damaged, it's as if they scream. They give out an electric signal that can be heard by instruments. But basically we think that, the plant can't move. It may suffer, but it can't cry out the way we do. So what is the next development? The next development is the animals, in beasts, in winged birds, and even later on in thinking men. Life has made of the rhythm of the heart. There's a kind of beating rhythm. That's the music of life, if we could hear it. And that beating rhythm wakes up, forces the unconscious tissues to awake. And when they begin to wake up, they are longing, asking for happiness. And they search for happiness. They may not find happiness. Instead, they earn the pang, the pain. But they can also sometimes thrill with pleasure. And even there may be a kind of laughter, of brief delight, just for a moment or two. They can quiver with pain, and they can crave, they can experience a strong longing for ecstasy, for intense delight. This is all about the smile of God's rapture, how it expresses itself in life. Dana? Yes?
Do you think Sri Aurobindo has a special reason that having truth is always brooding?
That he means something. Yes, I think so. It's like it's always there, and it's always giving birth to something. Although we don't notice it. That's how I understand it. And that's, of course, if we can become really spiritual beings, we would become conscious of that delight, always present everywhere. Dana?
Imperative, voiceless, ill-understood, too far from light, too close to being's core, born strangely in time from the eternal bliss. It presses on heart's core and vibrant love. Its sharp, self-seeking feel tears our consciousness. Our pain and pleasure have that sting for cause. instinct with it, but blind to its true joy. The soul's desire leaps out towards passing things.
Yes. So it, no? This is that rapturous smile, is secret everywhere. Huh? This is what is forcing the unconscious tissues to awake. But in the life, this early form, primitive forms of life, it's very, very powerful. It's an imperative drive, but it can't speak. It can't be expressed in words. And it's ill understood. Even the being that experiences it doesn't know really what it's experiencing. Because it's too far away from the original light, and it's too close to the very deep heart of the being. This rapture is born strangely in time from the eternal bliss. The Ananda is eternal and infinite, but once it is born in time, something happens to it. No, it's not what it was originally. But still, that pressure is there. It's pressing on our hearts and on our nerves. It's trying to find itself and its original delight. And that sharp self-seeking, it tears at our consciousness. It wakes us up to pain and desire. Our pain and pleasure have that sting of awakening consciousness. That's the cause of them. The soul is instinct with, filled with that self-seeking, but it's unconscious at first of that true joy, the true cause of it. So it leaps out instead towards passing things, all these transient, uneternal things that are here in the world. Amrita?
All nature's longing drive, naught can resist. Some soaking through the blood and quickened sense, and ecstasy of the infinite is her cause. It turns in us to finite lives and lust. The will to conquer and hate, to seize and keep, to enlarge life's room and scope and pleasure's range, to battle and our fame and make one's own. The hope to mix one's joy with others' joy, and yearning to possess and be possessed, to enjoy and to be enjoyed, to feel, to live.
Yes. So we experience this, no? This pain and pleasure, and the way the soul's desire leaps out, not for its true joy, but through these surface passing things. No? And it takes this form of all nature's longing drive. None can resist. When we feel that nature's longing drive, it's impossible to resist. All that comes surging like a tsunami rushing through the body, through the blood, and the senses become very intensified and quickened, more alive. The cause of nature is, or of this nature's longing, is an ecstasy of the infinite. But we are not infinite. We experience things in a very limited way. So in us, that ecstasy, that drive, turns to us to finite loves and loves. We love small things. We desire small things. And he gives some examples. The will to conquer and have, to seize and keep, hold on to things, to make our life room larger, to have more space and more range to act, and a wider possibility of pleasure. And we don't mind battling and winning victories in order to make things our own. And it expresses itself in this hope, this longing to unite with others, to mix one's own joy with others' joy. And that also becomes a yearning, a longing to possess another being, and also to be possessed by another being, to enjoy and be enjoyed. This need to feel, to live. That's what we feel life is. It's this interchange and possession and enjoyment and exchange. Rita, would you lead?
Here was its early brief attempt to be, its rapid end of momentary delight, whose stamp of failure haunts all ignorant life, inflicting still its habit on the cells, the phantom of a dark and evil start, ghost-like pursues all that we dream and do. Although on earth are firm established lives, a working of habit or a sense of law, a steady repetition in the flux, yet are its roots of will ever the same. These passions are the stuff of which we are made. This was the first cry of the awaking world. It clings around us still and clamps the God.
Thank you. In this realm of the little life, this is where these urges come to us from. And Aswapati sees in that very, very primitive level of life, all this is already beginning. It's early, brief. These urges don't last long, but they emerge for the first time. And they soon are over, a rapid end of momentary delight. And that loss, that sense of failure, oh, I couldn't seize it, I couldn't keep it, I couldn't experience it. That stamp, that mark of failure is hanging around all ignorant life. And especially, it's still inflicting, imposing its habit on the cells of our body. It's this phantom, this ghost of a dark and evil start, ghost-like pursues all that we dream and do, all the imperfection, dissatisfaction. It's somehow left over from those early stages of the development of life. Now, on earth, we're not still in that very primitive stage. We've come to a time when there are firm, established, living beings. They keep their form for quite some time, no? And there's some kind of stability formed by the working of habit, a sense of law, or this flow of energy that keeps repeating itself again and again. That's a more developed state than this little life that he's telling us about. But he says even our life, the roots of its will are still the same. These passions that ruled in the world of little life, it's the very stuff and substance of which we are made. This was the first cry of the waking world. Like a baby being born, we expect it to cry. No? What he's seeing is like the birth of life. No? But that cry, actually midwives say now, modern midwives say, that what the baby experiences in the first few minutes and hours of its life, it retains those impressions throughout its life. And that may affect its health and its psychology and everything. So it's something like that whatever happened to life in its beginnings clings around us still, and it's clamping, it's restricting the development of our divine part. Very poignant lines. This was the first cry of the awaking world. And it clings around us still and clamps the God. So I think we'll stop there for today.
His sight, spiritual in embodying orbs, could pierce through the grey phosphorescent haze and scan the secrets of the shifting flux that animates these mute and solid cells, and leads the thought and longing of the flesh and the keen lust and hunger of its will. This too he tracked along its hidden stream and traced its acts to a miraculous fount. A mystic presence none can probe nor rule, creator of this game of ray and shade, in this sweet and bitter paradoxical life, asks from the body the soul's intimacies, and by the swift vibration of a nerve links its mechanic throbs to light and love. It summons the spirit's sleeping memories up from subconscious depths beneath time's foam. Oblivious of their flame of happy truth, arriving with heavy eyes that hardly see, they come disguised as feelings and desires, like weeds upon the surface float a while, and rise and sink on a somnambulist tide. Impure, degraded though her motions are, always a heaven truth broods in life's deeps. In her obscurest members burns that fire. A touch of God's rapture in creation's acts, a lost remembrance of felicity lurks still in the dumb roots of death and birth. The world's senseless beauty mirrors God's delight. That rapturous smile is secret everywhere. It flows in the wind's breath, in the tree's sap. Its hued magnificence blooms in leaves and flowers. When life broke through its half-drowse in the plant that feels and suffers but cannot move or cry, in beast and in winged bird and thinking man, it made of the heart's rhythm its music's beat. It forced the unconscious tissues to awake and ask for happiness and earn the pang and thrill with pleasure and laughter of brief delight and quiver with pain and crave for ecstasy. Imperative, voiceless, ill understood, too far from light, too close to being's core, born strangely in time from the eternal bliss. It presses on heart's core and vibrant nerve. Its sharp self-seeking tears our consciousness. Our pain and pleasure have that sting for cause. Instinct with it, but blind to its true joy, the soul's desire leaps out towards passing things. All nature's longing drive none can resist, comes surging through the blood and quickened sense. An ecstasy of the infinite is her course. It turns in us to finite loves and lusts, the will to conquer and have, to seize and keep, to enlarge life's room and scope and pleasure's range, to battle and overcome and make one's own, the hope to mix one's joy with others' joy, a yearning to possess and be possessed, to enjoy and be enjoyed, to feel, to live. Here, was its early, brief attempt to be, its rapid end of momentary delight, whose stamp of failure haunts all ignorant life. Inflicting still its habit on the cells, the phantom of a dark and evil start, ghost-like pursues all that we dream and do. Although on earth our firm established lives, a working of habit or a sense of law, a steady repetition in the flux, yet are its roots of will ever the same. These passions are the stuff of which we are made. This was the first cry of the awaking world. It clings around us still and clamps the gauze.